știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to this Decline and Fall special as we await the final verdict on the Trump-Zelensky summit. We are going to be looking back at the Putin-Trump summit in Alaska and also taking in some developments that have happened since then. Joining us in just a moment will be our co-host, comrade, and friend Kit Clarenberg, who will be joining us from his usual undisclosed location in the once and future socialist Yugoslavia. So be sure to add your questions in the chat if you have anything to add. So let's just say hello to who's already in here. So we have Comrade Daniel in Somerset. We have Slumbering Colossus. We have Luca, who's asked an interesting question. We have David King. We have Jerry. We have Potted Rodent. We have John Doe. We have Anthony from Prague. We have Matt Volmer, Slumbering Colossus, Michael Sherry, Almir, Social Emotional Learning with Dr. Donny. Sounds like a radio show in itself. Kawa Justiniano, Alan from Oakland, California, San Francisco Bay Area, Jasmine Wolf, and Nemo Yederman. Now, and also joining us now, it's Comrade Jawad as well. So, hello, everybody. And we are here tonight to discuss the summit with Putin and Trump, key developments therein, and also the aftermath, because in the aftermath you have seen a sort of scramble for position brought about by the discussion that took place between Putin and Trump. The scramble in question is the undignified scramble of the European leaders and Keir Starmer in desperately trying to get hold of Trump and persuade him away, I think, from some of the things that he seems to be agreeing with Putin on, about which more in a moment. Now, Zelensky has gone over to Washington today to have a sit down with Trump and Rubio and others, which we'll get to in just a moment. The European leaders, including our own beloved Sir Keir, a man so inspiring that when that he, even his own underpants, pretend that he's someone else. A man with apparently certain, allegedly, certain predilections towards certain Ukrainian assets, which might animate his decision making. But I will stall no longer. We have coming on with us live, it's Kit Clarenberg, all the way from once and future Yugoslavia. Kit, hello.
Hey, how's it going?
We are doing well. We have 172 of the good people of the world watching us already. Everybody
That's
get
fantastic.
sharing and liking the stream. Help us beat the perpetually lobotomized AA on X due to the fact that, of course, it kept recognizing the genocide of the Palestinians. But Kit, I've just been explaining to the audience that we are here tonight with a news flash broadcast. And no, Keir Starmer hasn't confessed to his eternal love of Ukrainian male models and resigned. It's that the European leaders have engaged in what I can only describe as a undignified scramble to Washington, D.C. to make themselves relevant again. And not apparently successfully, it would seem. So, but let's start off tonight, Kit, by talking about the Alaskan summit. We will get to the Europeans' lack of dignity later. But Trump, of course, met with Putin for a discussion which lasted just over 2 hours, not nearly as long as was planned. And Putin, in several instances, actually spoke English in this summit, which I think is significant because it's not something he usually does, although he's very proficient in it, it would appear. But I wanted to get, first of all, your reaction on What's the big news, and is the summit in any way significant?
Well, yes. I mean, I think Putin speaks English a lot better than he usually lets on. And we can talk about why that might be. But I think that in the spirit of victory laps and patting ourselves on the back, it wouldn't be a decline and fall episode without an extended session of this, Alex. I think that we called it like pretty much correctly, which it was never going to lead to anything particularly concrete. Russia unambiguously has the battlefield advantage. They have absolutely no incentive whatsoever to make concessions or stop pushing forward. They are making extraordinary advances at the moment. There is Ukrainian territory falling on an hourly basis at this stage. So it was never going to, as in the fevered imaginations and of European leaders and Zelensky himself, going to lead to a ceasefire, let alone the foundations of a negotiated settlement. That said, I think that the tone that Trump struck immediately after, in interviews after the summit, where he referred to Russia as a very powerful country. And of course, Trump is known for bombast and exaggeration in everything that he says. But this is the first time a Western leader has acknowledged this kind of ineluctable fact for several years now. Of course, the proxy war was presaged with the best part of a decade of Russia as a gas station with nukes. We still hear a lot of how, Russia has a smaller GDP than Spain, which is A, not true, and B, based on a complete misreading of economic figures. But I do think that possibly the most significant thing to emerge from this is that Trump is now saying, and he's saying very, very clearly, number one, a ceasefire is not going to preface a deal. A deal is going to preface a ceasefire, which is the Russian position. I think that also as well, he has unambiguously and repeatedly stated that Ukraine is not going to be joining NATO, and the territory it's lost to Russia isn't coming back. Okay, so that's off the table. Now, I would direct whichever of our viewers is, suitably insane enough not to have caught our last edition, which I think was a particularly good one. We kind of went into how, in the lead up to Alaska, European leaders had been clearly panicking and pleading with Trump for assurances, quote unquote, and commitments that he wouldn't make concessions to Putin and that on territory or security. And we made the very obvious point, which is apparently lost on the EU foreign policy infrastructure, which is dominated by Baltic lunatics led by Kaja Kallas, a particularly unpleasant chihuahua. Irrespective of whatever commitments Trump makes verbally to the Europeans, what are they going to do if he doesn't honor them? And the answer is nothing. Mm-hmm. Absolutely nothing, because the US has Europe over a barrel economically, politically, militarily. All they can do is whine. And I might add as well, and we can get into this in more detail, but I think this was something that you drew to my attention, Alex, was this joint statement signed by multiple European leaders, and I'll let you take the lead on this. But I just think it just marvelously struck. It was a kind of marvelous microcosm of where we've gotten to, where all of these European leaders who have taken a very hawkish, tough line on Russia were seemingly fighting back the urge to refer to Trump as daddy, while praising his masterful handling of the Alaska summit, and welcoming his efforts to stop the killing in Ukraine, end Russia's war of aggression, and achieve just and lasting peace. And of course, that didn't emerge from the meeting. They weren't even talking about anything grounded in reality. but it was thank you, Emperor Trump, for just doing this.
Well, I think that what this reveals, and I urge everybody to read this completely pathetic statement. In fact, I will post it into the chat so viewers can enjoy it themselves. What this is essentially is not anything particularly. The only things that are significant to it is the fact that they've changed tactics in terms of how they deal with Trump. In the first term, what they did, really following on from like how the Democrats responded to their defeat in 2016, was to scream and cry and yell about international norms and decency and Trump's a Putin puppet and everything else. That didn't really work. And also then it didn't stop Trump coming back. So with a stronger vote behind him than he had the first time round. And also the Europeans now are in a weaker position than they were in 2016 to 17, weakened actually thanks to Joe Biden. But what they've done essentially is change tactics so that everything that Trump does, Mark Rutte and others and Ursula and various other characters like Kaya Kallas say, oh, Mr. Trump, you are a genius. You have defeated the evil Eastern mastermind Putin with your amazing way of ending wars through peace, through strength. Because what they think they can do with this is essentially just say, yes, Trump, you're marvelous because you've done all of this. And of course, it's stuff that he hasn't done. So let's just go to this now, saying we are also ready to work with President Trump and President Zelensky towards a trilateral summit with European support. We are clear that Ukraine must have ironclad security guarantees to effectively defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. We welcome President Trump's statement that the US is prepared to give security guarantees. The coalition of the willing, familiar phrase for those of us old enough to remember, is ready to play an active role. No limitations should be placed on Ukraine's armed forces or on its cooperation with third countries. Russia cannot have a veto against Ukraine's pathway to EU and NATO. Right. And it will be up to Ukraine to make decisions on its territory. International borders must not be changed by force. All of that is a total fantasy. It's a total fantasy. First of all, there is no coalition of the willing. There's a coalition of bullshitters who have said that, oh, well, we might put troops there. Then the Russians say, no, you won't. And they go, well, we never said we would. There is no effective guarantee that the US or the Europeans can give to Ukraine. Given that Trump has apparently accepted the Russian terms with relating to like how this will be negotiated. As Kit said, Trump has apparently agreed with the Russians on one very crucial point, which is there will not be a ceasefire before there is a comprehensive agreement in place. So what the US has been wanting, actually for as far back as the Biden administration, because Blinken started talking about this just after the failure of the Ukrainian offensive in summer of 2023, which is, oh, we might need to freeze the conflict, meaning that they will basically say, okay, that's it for now. We'll come back later with no agreement in place. The Russians, since June of last year, since Putin's address to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, outlined the way they wanted to see the end of this brought about. And I will reiterate this for the purposes of bringing those who didn't watch our last program, if so, then where were you, up to date, which is that the NATO has to be off the table completely, not for 5 years, not for 10 years, but in perpetuity. Ukraine has to be a neutral state. That used to just mean no to NATO, but now it means, thanks to Kaya Kallas and Ursula von der Leyen, no to the EU as well. That wasn't the case a decade ago. That wasn't the case 3 years ago, but the Europeans have made it so that it is now unacceptable to the Russians for the Ukrainians to join the EU. Also, the end to persecution of Russians and Russian speakers in Ukraine, the dismantling of the Bandera cult and things associated with it, and the ending of the persecution of the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, those things which the Russians wanted have been pretty clear, with the addition of maybe the EU stipulation, since 2022. And in fact, they made those terms clear again when they met with the Ukrainian delegation earlier this year. Then Putin goes to Alaska and he makes these clear again to Trump and says, this is what we want, and there's no peace until we get these things addressed. So this raises a rather interesting question for the Europeans, which is, well, what the hell is this statement about? Because they're not going to get any of this. Like, no European force is going to go into Ukraine. Not now, not in a year. I don't think in 5 years either. The Russians won't accept it. The Americans aren't going to put their own forces at risk. So Trump said today, according to reporting in the ever hilarious but not intentionally Guardian, when they were covering Zelensky's meeting with Trump, Trump was saying, "Oh well, we'll be involved in Ukrainian security." Well, I could say that. I mean, I frequent a corner shop that's staffed by Ukrainians, so I'm involved in Ukrainian security in some way. Surely, some of that money goes back to the homeland. So, like, it means nothing. Like, Trump's just making these sort of vague statements. But he must know by now, because Putin will have said it to him over and over again in English, those are the conditions. And if he's accepted some of those, then it means that all the flannel that him and Zelensky have engaged in today, and all that Zelensky's talk about, I need a big army, I cannot accept limitations on the alliances that I will have, that Ukraine will have, I cannot accept any territorial concessions, that's all complete nonsense. Because the Americans apparently have already started to accept what the Russian terms are. At least they've accepted that they are the terms, and that's what the discussion will be around. So this is all complete blather, basically.
Yeah, and I think that the Alex Christoforou, whose name I may well have just mispronounced. Sorry, Alex. I think you're excellent. He's part of the Duran. Yeah, like he called attention to how Politico framed the European delegation to Washington with Zelensky. And their headline was, Europe is sending heavy hitters to US with Zelensky to bolster Kiev, or Kyiv, however they're pronouncing it these days. And he made the very obvious point, the same big hitters who were not invited to Alaska and called Trump daddy. And I think this is again a point that we got onto on our last broadcast, but it does bear repeating, is, look, this is a discussion about a war that is occurring, at least in geographical terms, in Europe. None of the European leaders who have been all in on this, including, I would say, like of specific, of kind of particularly incongruous absence, if we're going to talk about who's actually been running and pushing this proxy war. The lack of Keir Starmer from Britain, the country that has been described by Ukrainian officials themselves as the brains of the proxy war, God help us all. Like they were completely cut out of negotiations, and I think, yeah, there are very, very clear. There are two historical precedents which I banged on about quite a lot, like over the past 3.5 years now. But I think I won't stop citing them because I think that they remain relevant, right? Like, how did the war in Afghanistan, or the NATO/US led occupation of Afghanistan, end? Oh, it ended with Trump meeting with the Taliban, hammering out the terms of a total withdrawal. Who was absent from these discussions? The puppet government in Kabul, which had absolutely zero power, influence, or relevance. And also all of the US's allies that had been propping up and providing meat for potential body bags in the case of an IED attack for 20 plus years in Afghanistan. They were kept out of the loop as well. There were reports in the wake of the US's kind of fall of Saigon-esque exodus from Kabul that there were like Georgian soldiers trapped there who hadn't been told that everyone was leaving. So they were just like kind of like stuck at this base like not really knowing what to do, while the Taliban just marched unopposed throughout the city. So Trump's approach to this could well be: don't speak to the monkey, speak to the organ grinder. Right, so that's one historical precedent to bear in mind, and another, which is more close to home for me in every way, is in the way that the Bosnian Civil War, which began because the US wanted it to happen, and they sabotaged numerous peace deals and negotiated settlements in advance of the conflict because they wanted a war to destroy Yugoslavia, right? They encouraged their proxies, who were Croats and Bosniaks, to not negotiate at any point, despite the fact that they were losing these conflicts for most of the time they were occurring, from 1992 to 1995, right? Like their proxies would make maximalist demands, they would refuse to make any concessions, and they did so on the belief that they had unquestioning, endless US support for keeping these wars going. Okay. When in late 1995 the US got bored of this, they suddenly decided that they wanted peace in Bosnia, Yugoslavia having been sufficiently wrecked by the experience in every way. And then they turned around to their Bosnian proxies, and they put before them a peace deal known as the Dayton Agreement, which was worse than any prior peace deal they'd been offered, but considerably, which included them handing over their territory to the Serbs. And the US said to them, if you don't accept this, we're going to abandon you. Right? And this is after three years of encouraging them not to negotiate. Sorry, does this sound familiar? We know for a fact, right, and I will keep going back to this because it genuinely makes me angry, actually, is that we know it has been confirmed by the mainstream media in not as many terms that in April 2022, which is to say, yes, 3.5 years ago, or almost, that we were a signature away from a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. And Foreign Affairs, the in-house imperial journal of the Council on Foreign Relations, has written about this, stating that Russia's demands were very reasonable and amounted to Ukraine respecting, quote unquote, Moscow's most basic security interests. Right? Like we could have had peace then. There wouldn't be, upwards of 1 million Ukrainians dead now. Europeans wouldn't have been suffering like economic misery, at least to the same degree, for like 3.5 years if the British hadn't deliberately sabotaged this. Because of their commitment to, quote unquote, keeping Ukraine fighting at all costs. Now, sorry, to bring this full circle and to hand the floor back to you, Alex, the fact that the Alaskan meeting went ahead at all, and it went ahead between purely representatives of the US and Russian governments with zero foreign presence there, no Ukrainians, no European leaders, at all. I think that in itself was a statement, right? And so, irrespective of whatever joint letters these European apparatchiks sign, and whatever their alleged aspirations for the future of Ukraine, it's not going to be decided by them. And if it doesn't go their way, the range of responses is extremely limited. That doesn't mean that they're not capable of sabotaging these talks that are ongoing now in Washington, right? And we will get into in due course methods by which the Ukrainians and the British are already trying to do this. But really, in terms of keeping this going, without US financial support and without US weapons, it's over. It is officially over, rather than just kind of over without being acknowledged as such, as we're at now.
Yeah. I want to just read the Kremlin official release from Putin's briefing of senior officials after the meeting. Now, it isn't all up there because the Kremlin likes to redact these things, but here's what he said to the senior government officials in Russia. I would like to note right away that the visit was timely and very useful. We discussed practically all areas of our interaction, but first of all, of course, we talked about a possible resolution of the Ukrainian crisis on a fair basis. And of course, we had the opportunity, which we did, to talk about the genesis, about the causes of the crisis. It is the elimination of these root causes that should form the basis of the settlement. So Putin not only said that to the inner circle in Russia, he has been briefing it to various partners across the world today. If you look at the TASS feed, he's been speaking to the Mirziyoyev of Uzbekistan, Japarov, one of the leaders of, I think it was Kyrgyzstan. He's been speaking to Lula from Brazil and various others, all saying the same thing, that it was a productive meeting because they were able to outline to the United States, these are the root causes that must be addressed. Now, one of those is, of course, NATO expansion. Now, let's not forget that one of the things that they put forward to the Biden administration was a treaty on basically reversing NATO expansion. Now, that hasn't gone away. Now, it's there in the background. So if Trump, one of the fears that Starmer and the Europeans, particularly like France and Germany, have, is that if Trump is prepared to open that box marked NATO expansion, if he's prepared to even hear Putin out on that question, which none of the other European leaders, never mind the British, would do before 2022, then that calls into question the last 30 years of NATO expansion. Even if Trump, in his usual scattergun, scatterbrained way, doesn't really mean to pick apart NATO. If he's prepared to actually talk about it, and if the Russians get their way, saying that you cannot have Ukraine, basically, well, that basically puts a dagger in NATO's heart. Because if it can't expand, if it can't absorb more countries, then the global reach of NATO, which the Biden administration had in mind as a big objective, well, that might be over. So that's a hugely significant thing that Trump has essentially agreed to talk about. Now, the other points I wanted just to bring up at this stage were that we've already talked about the security guarantees. I wanted just to mention the bullshitting around we've given the Ukrainians this guarantee and that guarantee. Even if they go for a sort of Article 5, NATO Article 5 type guarantee for Ukraine to, cover Zelensky's ass, it's not worth the paper that it's written on, because who's going to do it? If the Russian terms are that no European army, no American army can go into Ukraine, that the Ukrainian army is restricted to well under 100,000 men. They might not even have that many combat-ready men left by that stage. If there is, and if all the militias and the regiments associated with fascists have to be disbanded, then where's the security guarantee coming from? There can't be one, because there's no foreign troops going to be deployed inside Ukraine. And Trump has already essentially conceded that the NATO membership is up for negotiation, and the Russians aren't going to suddenly turn around and say, oh, you know what, Britain and France can deploy troops to Ukraine, which, by the way, let's just emphasize this point again, they wouldn't do anyway, not without the US going in huge numbers, which the Russians won't allow. So what essentially has been agreed to here, or not agreed to, but what is in the works slowly, is that the US will essentially slowly watch as the rest of Donetsk is taken, and the Europeans will squabble and bicker amongst themselves and with the US about what's going to happen. But essentially what will happen is Trump will pull support, because there are strong arguments, which we will get to, I think, in the show we'll do later in the week, about where the US wants to direct its resources. Bear in mind, Trump issued threats of dire consequences to the Russians if they didn't agree to a ceasefire in 50 days, then in 10 days. Then no one listened to those threats. Then he said, oh, okay, we'll have a conversation then. So it hasn't worked. Threatening the Russians hasn't worked. They can't threaten the Chinese. The Chinese have them by the fucking balls when it comes to rare earth metals and also US supply chains, which can't be disentangled from China. So they can't threaten the Chinese. They're not even doing a particularly good job at threatening the Indians, which are led by this like piss weak collaborationist government headed by Modi. So where's the US to turn? Well, again, more on this later in the week, but it looks like the turn is to West Asia. That's where the turn may be too. They desperately need air defense assets to head into Israel for the renewal of the war on Iran, which Trump, in a Truth Social post, in essence admitted was going to be renewed. He says, well, I stopped 6 wars, but, one of them might be renewed soon. Guess which one? So this is going to come to a close. It's going to come to a close, basically not with a bang, but with a whimper. The only question is what the Russians want to do with the rest of Ukraine, because this Kiev regime, and here I'll throw back to you, Kit, for your political assessment of this. It's my judgment that the Kiev regime is basically held together by the continuation of the war. Without the war, the Ukrainian population might just turn the guns around and start shooting at the Kiev regime. So when this ends, that I don't think that Zelensky or Yermak or any of the others in the Kiev regime are politically viable anymore, nor is that regime viable. But what's your judgment on it? If the Russians get their terms, can the Kiev regime even survive 10 minutes?
No, and I think 10 minutes is, probably an optimistic assessment. I mean, look, this was something we were planning to do as a kind of standalone segment, but it does feed in. Is like one thing that people seem to have already forgotten this, but it was like pretty significant. That on I believe it was August 6th, Gallup, which is this US polling giant. Right. They published, and this is in the days leading up to the summit in Alaska. Interestingly, perhaps it's a coincidence, perhaps it isn't. That it showed that support for Ukrainian victory has collapsed across the country, across every age, across every demographic. 69% of people want the war to end as soon as fucking possible. Right? There is only 24% who think that Ukraine should continue fighting until it wins the war. And bearing in mind that, in Ukraine, as we interviewed a very patriotic Ukrainian dissident who has suffered a terrible personal and professional price, Marta Historenko. We interviewed her a few weeks back. She has had threats on her life for talking out about the nature of the Zelensky government and its intimate, very dangerous alliance with Ukrainian neo-Nazis and fascists. People are afraid to speak the truth in Ukraine about their feelings when asked by international pollsters. So the fact that 69% found by Gallup of Ukrainians want this just over now, right? Is very, very highly significant. Okay, and so I just think that this government knows that the second that martial law is lifted, then the government is in serious trouble. I know from conversations I have had with a great many Ukrainians living in Belgrade, Serbia, that their perception is that their government basically prostituted themselves to Britain and the US and got burned. They're not stupid. They can see very clearly what's happened here because it's been admitted, it's been openly admitted. This is a proxy. The New York Times has used the phrase proxy war to describe the conflict. and the Times of London, as I mentioned, has published articles in which it is stated that Britain is leading this and like overseeing and encouraging and inspiring the Ukrainian military disasters like the counter invasion of Kursk. Like I've caught an enormous amount of flack for saying from the very start of this that this is all being led by the British, and like it's now being just admitted as axiomatic fact by the media. It's quite incredible. Really, but I also as well. Sorry, just to try on slightly further. I think I think that the point about NATO expansion that you make is really important as well, because what you got to bear in mind is that, and they even openly published policy papers about this, is that after Russia's reunification with Crimea in 2014, it was understood by NATO that their window of opportunity for expanding further was getting a lot smaller, because Russia had demonstrated that it was willing to take decisive military action to protect its interests and protect its people and its allies, right? And so from that point on, you have Montenegro and Macedonia being enrolled in NATO in like the most corrupt, criminal manner imaginable via CIA MI6 coups, which, like, contrary to the wishes of like the overwhelming majority of the population, right? Is like I think that Trump's statements and yes, his clear demeanor around Russia iterating its demands and its security concerns. I think that NATO expansion is just over as a concept. Actually, like, that's kind of been acknowledged at this stage, because Russia will not tolerate it. You know, that in turn leads to all sorts of questions about, well, all of these countries that were enrolled, as we've discussed before, during the 90s and the early 2000s, often in like very corrupt ways, via color revolutions and all sorts of other skullduggery. We should do a special about this, actually, because it's an interesting topic. Like, that seems to just be off the table now. And I mean, that is a significant what would you call it, reversal, given I mean Biden, of course, wasn't in charge of the Biden administration, because he was completely out of his mind, and senile, but Joe Biden was the person who led NATO expansion in the 90s. And it was clear that, yes, that under the Biden administration, they wanted like Japan and fucking Mongolia to enroll. Like that was the insanity around this question.
Well, and not forgetting Colombia, who are apparently already in. But before we move on to more serious topics, I did want to delve slightly into the realm of comedy, because there was one allegedly spice-addled MI6 asset who was very unhappy with the Alaska summit. I speak, of course, of perennial show favorite, a certain Mr. Paul Mason, who has ventured forth onto his favorite medium, that of X or Twitter. I'm surprised he's not migrated to Blue Sky, actually. With the rest of
that is weird. That is weird. Yeah. I mean, like literally, it's become the hideout for like all of these people who used to be boosted by the algorithm insanely. But they've all just run away now.
Yeah, well, not Paul. He's staying around to tweet another day, and he's trying his usual brand of like crude humor as he tries to affect his regular bloke thing. So I'm going to do the Paul Mason impression. I beg the good listeners' indulgence. Imagine Munich, but Chamberlain wore diapers, and everyone else had to say he had advanced the cause of peace because he was an imbecile, and humouring him made a difference. Only there was no piece of paper. Only some spent dinner menus. That's my best Paul Mason impression. But it needs a little bit more work, but that is the essence.
It's terrifyingly accurate. I fear, actually.
Well,
just
it's unfortunately we come from a fairly similar part of the world, so it's relatively easy for me to do. He is Lee's greatest disgrace, other than their rugby team. But Paul is very unhappy. Kit, he's clearly, probably, allegedly back on the spice again. But his words are, as one can tell from the responses to him, falling on increasingly deaf ears these days. And maybe it's the case that, like, being a pro-war asset, even in Britain, is running out of juice now.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, this has been the case for a very long time, where, like, to his credit, like, when we at the Grey Zone like busted him for like going after left-wing anti-war, anti-imperialist figures and coordinating those activities with British intelligence, he kept on posting through it, and he was like, consistently publishing absolute rubbish about the left-wing case for NATO, and it was getting no traction whatsoever. And it's like, I think people aren't stupid at this point, and the fact that he's not only on hasn't migrated to blue sky like all the other mainstream fluffers who couldn't hack the heat of being under serious criticism and not being algorithmically boosted beyond their credibility or actual standing. The fact that he's kind of still just like battling on, and like, you got to just, like, what kind of mindset you would have to be in to like write something like that, particularly using the American term diapers. And he was just like, oh, that's going to appeal to the US audiences, that, and just putting it. That was probably an even worse impression than yours. But like, it's just, but for someone who likes to make a lot of his Labour background when he's not trying to run for MP in Wales. If I have in any way contributed to the collapse of this scumbag's career and his failure to get a seat in Parliament, I see that as a lifetime achievement award. On slightly more serious matters, perhaps.
Yes. For talking of MI6 and talking of Mr. Paul Mason, who I'm sure, that's legal disclaimer, he's not involved in MI6 terrorist operations in any way other than to tweet about them. We come to a slightly more serious, should we say, set of considerations. So we'll come to the sabotage operations in a moment. But just we were saying that Paul might be running out of juice when it comes to being a pro-war voice. There are even Daily Telegraph clowns are having now to admit that this might be the end. And one such clown is I think future show favorite, because like he certainly earned that status. It's a certain Colonel Richard Kemp, who distinguishes himself by being one of a very long line of like British more medal ribbons than brain cells. And are prepared to literally anything in order to fill space in the Daily Telegraph. And here he is, Colonel Kemp. No resemblance to Action Man, but they probably should be. Here we go. You've tweeted this recently. Kit, why don't you tell us about the good Colonel and his many opinions?
Right. Well, okay. So, I mean, Richard Kemp, he manages to be like in very classic British style, like kind of understatedly one of the worst people who's ever lived. Kind of this low key way. So like on top of being like this absolutely repulsive Zionist, who's like who recently went to Gaza and said, "Oh, I'm seeing aid being given to Palestinians. They're not starving." It's just all in on the total genocide of Palestinians. He is paid enormous amounts of money to write military analysis for the Daily Telegraph, and he just has this habit of coming out with these bombastic claims that Putin is inches from defeat, and then admitting, oh, actually Ukraine's fucked. And he's done this the tweets are on screen now are like tip of the iceberg in terms of him doing this. And he went from saying that the Kursk counter invasion had shamed Putin and was the end of the regime and the war, to saying it was the worst miscalculation that Ukraine could have made. And yeah, he makes an enormous amount of money being paid this, and he's not the Daily Telegraph's only military analyst. Is also Hamish de Bretton Gordon, who has a weekly column where he claims that Ukraine's about to win, and has been doing that while Ukraine's been getting battered for 3.5 years, and it's just they're paid to just lie and try and spin anything they possibly can. The fact that the Daily Telegraph would publish such an op-ed by someone who it's laying the foundations for a significant Ukrainian capitulation. We've gone from Ukraine must regain all of its lost territory since 1991, and there's going to be a beach party on Crimea in 1993, to actually Ukraine doesn't need all of the territory it's lost, but the red line is not having access to the Black Sea. And that's in the scheme of things a total reversal in a not a very long period of time.
Yes.
In the span of less than 2 years, we've gone from maximalism only to, okay, we're going to need to make concessions real fast.
Yes. And therefore we point to this article by Tom Sharp in the Daily Telegraph, basically outlining terms which might just be acceptable. Now, the thing you have to understand about the Daily Telegraph, and I think it would be worth at some point just doing a sort of guide for people as to the British bourgeois media landscape, and as to which particular section of the vile British ruling class each represents. The Telegraph represents the sort of what I would call the Colonel Bufton Tuftons of the world, which is the sort of beetroot-faced retired military officers, usually with significant investments in some kind of hedge fund or another, or who've run a private military company and have a good golf game or think they do. And, only vote Conservative because there's nothing more ferociously reactionary available, and probably think Nigel Farage is a bit of a liberal. That's the general sort of tenor of the readers. The sort of owning type, the people who really have power who read it are sort of senior spies, military intelligence types, the kind of lunatics that you cover in terms of the British hierarchy. So if they're running stuff like this, that means a conversation has been had within the British military and intelligence hierarchy and the wider ruling class as to, well, what can we get away with giving up and present it still as a victory? So the conversation has clearly been had. If Ukraine can hang on to Black Sea access, if we can stabilize the Kiev regime, we can say we've won. Because Putin wanted all of Ukraine, even though he didn't, and he's not got it, and it's only thanks to our inspired leadership. Isn't Zelensky a hero? Then hopefully that they hope against hope that the Kiev regime doesn't collapse. That would be this is their fallback option, basically. Kit, did you want to say anything more about that?
Well, I mean, I couldn't have put it better. Really, Longfellow couldn't have put it better. I do think that we do need to do a series on the British media. That's like a 6-parter, potentially, but like at this stage, but like more, but yeah, like I just think that like the two British publications that I keep an eye on closest are the FT and the Daily Telegraph, explicitly for the reasons that Alex described in the case of the Telegraph, for other reasons entirely in respect of the FT. Although I would imagine that Alex and I agree on who reads that newspaper and the intended audience. But yeah, that like this is a huge shift. And like the people who are all in on this and for one reason or another, whether they're ex-military, ex-spooks, ex-finance, kind of finance, that these three are often kind of indivisible, very incestuous world these people operate in. That basically that they are readying. They are manufacturing consent. They are readying the foundations for a major capitulation in Ukraine. And this is after, like as we've delved into some of them, for the entirety of this, there has been relentless. Putin's on the verge of defeat. Ukraine's on the verge of victory. Ukraine is about to conquer the entirety of Russia. There was one stage where the Daily Telegraph published a 10-minute video investigation into how Ukraine was winning via information warfare and Zelensky getting selfies of himself taken at a petrol station. And I kid you not, that one of their contributors said, like, who's ex-military. His name is, I found it now, Dominic Nichols. He's ex-British Army, and he talks about how if I was a Russian conscript in Ukraine waiting for the tsunami of Kiev's counteroffensive to break over me, Budanov's silence and almost imperceptible smirk at the end of his tweets would terrify me. And we see how that turned out for everyone involved. But the point is I think if you actually look at like some of the Maidan ultras, including Owen Matthews, who's like very ridiculously pro-Ukraine and very anti-Russia, like he writes for the Spectator and has written for the Telegraph, and he has himself recently admitted that like Ukraine's lost, like we need to just negotiate and get the best possible peace now, and that includes like losing territory, potentially even more than Russia holds. And that is not, like I said, that is another parallel with Bosnia and other proxy conflicts where like US allies ended up getting less territory, they ended up getting less concessions than they wanted, so they ended up losing things as a result. So that is a very clear template for what might happen here.
Now, there are, of course, moves that our dear friends and perfidious Albion can make, or more to the point that they could subcontract out to make, being their favoured method of war. And that is, of course, to continue with what they've been doing from the very beginning, which is sabotage, terrorist attacks, insurgency stuff. So Ukraine recently attacked a pipeline that supplied oil to, of all places, Hungary and Slovakia. Now, that, of course, gives us an indication as to who's pulling the strings here. So politically, that's going after Orban and Fico. So this is no coincidence. We know very well the influence that the British certainly have over the Ukrainian special forces and intelligence. There is also, I would argue, a certain amount of ultra reactionary American influence as well, given the sheer number of American intelligence agencies and their collaboration with the British in like each gets the other to do things. The Americans in particular like to use the British as the pilot fish, basically. They do the groundwork to set things up. This can be then presented to an American president as a fact on the ground. So that they will be going after a pipeline that flowed to the dissenting voices in Europe is no surprise. There is also continuing, it would appear, according to Moscow Times, which is a exiled oligarch-owned newspaper, mysterious explosions at various different industrial plants in Russia, including this recent one in Ryazan, which killed 23. So this is the way in which the British in particular are going to try and play it. In public, Starmer will kiss Trump's ring. Every pun there is intended, by the way. And they will continue to proclaim that, oh, yes, Donald, peace through strength, whilst this will be what they do on the side. There was also another Ukrainian attempt to blow up the Kerch Bridge, another failure as well. So, Kip, the British clearly have an agenda here with this. It is to ensure that they make any peace negotiation essentially impossible, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting as well is that this stuff, particularly like the strike on Hungary's oil pipeline with Russia, it also hurts Serbia at a time that demonstrations are getting very violent. In some cases, so there's that aspect which Reuters doesn't actually mention, but which is potentially worthy of examination. But that basically, as we have told you so many times on this show, but we'll keep saying it because it doesn't get less true. The British strategy for fighting wars is like Operation Gladio style, secret armies carrying out sabotage, carrying out terror strikes, bombings, and that's how they envisage this going. That's how they want to keep this going. I have reported at the Grey Zone. Alex and I have discussed extensively about British intelligence creating secret partisan fighter cells that carry out sabotage, assassinations, and other like kind of black bag work in Russian occupied territory, quote unquote. They do the same in Russia. Again, as we've discussed before, that like Ukrainian diving units who've been taught how to carry out blitzkrieg raids on Russia's Black Sea fleet are now blowing up international oil tankers and major shipping, which is carrying things that's collected from Russia or sending to Russia. In exactly the manner that like the British are treating the Ukrainians, teaching the Ukrainians to do. So like that's how the British and Ukrainian proxies will try and sabotage this. They've done it before. And it hasn't really worked. Like, I mean, it's kind of, again, the speed at which this is the events move. This has been rather forgotten, but like there was if we go back to like Operation Spider's Web, which got like enormous amounts of like media coverage and has been like immortalized in videos on or by the Wall Street Journal on YouTube. Like the Ukrainians, they carried out this operation deep inside Russia. And they did so like on the eve of meetings between US and Russian officials. And like the media narrative for like a few days was Ukraine's back in this. But then the reality set in. And even mainstream media outlets were like, well, it doesn't actually change anything on the battlefield.
Yes.
And I think that's like what we're seeing now is it's a warning shot to the countries like Serbia. Just for a bit of like local political knowledge, it recently got the Trump administration has numerous individuals within it who have links to Serbia, whether that's like financial or otherwise, and the Serbian government just managed to negotiate a sanction waiver to keep importing Russian energy, which was like actually quite significant because they've been under pressure. Right, Serbia has been under pressure to sanction Russia. And so, I think that there is a determination to just keep this going and do so by sabotage, but like it's kind of ever diminishing returns at this point. You know, like
Yeah.
like I said, we had 3 days of exuberance in the media when the drone attack happened, but then reality came crashing. That this is not how you win a war, let alone even fight one.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I think the point that we will close out the hour on here, I think, is the point about manipulations and intelligence operations being a British and also an American speciality. And this, of course, brings up the specter of what many in the American media kept trying to reconjure, which is what your colleague at the Grey Zone, Aaron Mate, has reported on extensively, which is the Russiagate scandal. And this was via the intervention of a certain crap British spy, Christopher Steele, very much something that was made as much in London as it was in New York. And there was a series of releases carried out by the Trump administration that revealed that everything about this was false. I mean, I knew it was false 9 years ago when I started saying it, but it's taken many years for it to get officially confirmed that this was all just simply made up nonsense. But it was, as Aaron Mate has reported on, a key part in the drive to war, because the reason why they got so wound up and hysterical about Trump was that Hillary Clinton was meant to be the continuity candidate who would deliver the war that they desired in Ukraine. You and I, Kit, talked about this extensively in the last episode, drawing from that blog on the London School of Economics website from 2022, about how this was a planned operation. They wanted a war. They wanted a war that they thought that they could win using the methods of sanctions, using the methods of really sort of economic siege warfare combined with terrorism and intelligence operations, the kind of war that the British and the Americans can win. This was meant to be delivered by a Hillary Clinton administration. And so the fear with Trump wasn't really that he was in the pocket of Putin. That was never the case. It was that he wouldn't go along with the plan that they clearly had established from 2014, that they'd been working on since arguably 1991. And now it is all revealed to have been utterly made up from top to bottom, a completely fake story. So, Kit, what's your response to the latest releases, and how do you see the way in which Russiagate had its genesis? What do you see the purpose of it as being?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, wow, a lot to unpack here, but I think the key thing that, and I think that the timing of these releases is really interesting, right? So, the first time that Trump and Putin met in 2018, mere days earlier, the Mueller investigation had just indicted several GRU hackers for allegedly hacking the Democratic National Committee. Now, this reinforced the findings of a intelligence community assessment released in January 2017, which found with high confidence from the CIA that Russia had interfered in the 2016 election to help Trump win. Right, and it created a media, political, and public frenzy around this notion that Trump was won only because of Russian meddling, and this was days before he got sworn in as president. Now, that indictment of Mueller for the alleged GRU hacking of the Democratic National Committee emails, when Trump met Putin in 2018, Trump said that he believed Putin's denial that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. And this led to, again, a political and media meltdown with journalists, quote unquote, and politicians calling it treason and a national security risk, and proof that like Trump was working for the Kremlin, that he would believe like Putin's word on this. And there's been, in the lead up to the Alaska summit, interestingly, there was a flurry of releases of documents showing that the entire US intelligence community knew the idea that Russia helped Trump get elected was total bullshit. Yes, my friend and Grey Zone colleague Aaron Mate has written about this. Please do check it out. It's on his website. It's free to read. I have written about this. You can find it on my website, kitklarenbeck.com. That kind of sabotaged the first summit between Putin and Trump. The obvious that kind of upshot of that was that Trump was bounced consistently and very aggressively into proving his anti-Russian credentials, and he did things that Obama didn't do, like formally arm and train Azov, like tear up Cold War arms control treaties, it stand behind the Ukrainian government while it consistently refused to implement Minsk. Like, it was the Trump administration was way more heavily involved with events in Ukraine than the Obama administration was. Under Obama, the British were leading Western like training of Azov and other far right paramilitary groups. It was heavily involved in the prosecution of the brutal crackdown on South and Eastern Ukraine's Russian-speaking population, which they falsely framed as a Russian invasion, right? So I think that Trump, because simply for saying, wouldn't it be good if we could get on with Moscow on the campaign trail, the British were absolutely terrified that he might be slightly more dovish on Russia than they wanted. So Russiagate, most of the key players who are involved, not only in concocting of course, we know Christopher Steele, the disgraced MI6 spy who wrote the Trump Russia dossier, like the individual responsible for circulating the dossier to the highest levels of the US government was an individual called Andrew Wood, who was the ambassador to Moscow from the 90s to the early 2000s, very anti-Putin figure, who was tied to the Institute for Statecraft, Chris Donnelly's outfit, as we've discussed before. Chris Donnelly, veteran, senior NATO advisor, veteran British military intelligence operative, a key architect of the proxy war in Ukraine now. He ran an organization called the Institute for Statecraft. It was tied to Andrew Wood. Andrew Wood gives the dossier to John McCain, who then gives it to the FBI, and it gets circulated to Obama. And this is the basis of it heavily informed these claims that all of this British concocted rubbish heavily informed what the CIA and the US intelligence community more widely was saying about Trump's relationship with Russia, and it influenced official investigations and FBI probes into people connected to Trump, and it was all total bullshit cooked up in London. And I don't think the release of this material that Aaron and I have written about, like in the days leading up to the Alaska summit, is a coincidence.
No, because Trump's team, or those with half a brain, of course, will know very well that the attacks on him would come, and particularly if he does go for a follow-up meeting, as Putin said again in English at the end of their press conference, which is Putin just says next time in Moscow, and Trump's like, well, I don't know, I'll get in trouble for that, but it's clearly something which is in the works. And if he goes to Moscow, and particularly if it looks like that he's getting ready to essentially bail on the Ukraine project, there will be all kinds of attempts at reviving this all over again, So we will wait and see. But that takes us to the end of our hour-long special tonight, good viewers and listeners. A recording of this will be available on the Substack page tomorrow morning, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. If you're not subscribed to the Substack page, why not? There's all kinds of interesting things on there. Be sure to go over there and take a look. We will be back later in the week. We are, of course, working on some other interviews and specials, some of which you've heard mentioned here today. So do keep your eyes peeled. But until then, thanks to all 547 of you who have watched tonight. Good to have you all with us. And I'll leave the final word to our friend and comrade co-host Kit Clarenberg in his undisclosed location in the once and future socialist Yugoslavia.
Well, I mean, yeah, not much to add apart from thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, we'll have a longer form discussion later this week. Yeah, awesome to see so many people tuned in. It means the world to us. As depressing as it can be, we do enjoy bringing this information to you. Please like, share, and subscribe. Tell your friends, etc. We are thrilled at how this project has grown. We would like to grow more. Every like is a personal compliment. So do bear that in mind. Anyway, God bless you. Take care, and